Well, I really am kind of an amateur here because I thought I could turn this around, but apparently the only way I know of at this point is to shut it off and turn it around. Anyway, so what we're looking at here is this is my information, and obviously Lois and Eric here as siblings. It's pretty self-explanatory as far as what I'm starting out with here. My parents, their parents, my great-grandparents, and then the great-great-grandparents. If you follow these lines over and click on, say, just that arrow there, you'll get that everything expands as to Sophie Abel's ancestors, which of course are obviously ours. Once you get into this area, in other words, once you click on one of these little arrows here and expand the tree beyond this, there you enter into the gray area. Not to say that none of the information there is accurate. I think a lot of the stuff that I've added that is in this neck of the woods here, all of these different, I think everybody's got something expanded. A lot of this is still accurate. It's just that it's probably more incomplete. And the farther you go to the right, the less I could guarantee the accuracy. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm just telling you what I have found and what I believe to be accurate information. When you see something like this, what Ancestry is saying is, we think we found this person's father, and you can click on this and then go to the page that has information about him, and you can decide whether or not it looks like this is the right person, because one of the things you'll find, especially the Swedish ancestors, of which I am predominantly, there's a lot of Swedish. The only German line is this line here, the Letterer Kwastenberg. Everybody else is Swedish. So when you get into this area and their parents and ancestors, then you get into German. But when you get down here and you're talking about the Swedish folks, there's so many people that Anders, everybody had an Anders, everybody had a Johan. And that you'd find some of that with the Germans as well. But it's crazy with the Swedes. And then there's the whole thing about Swedish names and whether or not, for instance, Anders' son indicated somebody was Anders' son, and sometimes it was customary to call the daughters of that person Anders' daughter. Sometimes in more recent years, in the 20th century especially, people were going with Anderson as their last name, even if it was a daughter, and a son, but generally if it was a son, and actually they kept the two S's, Andersson, oftentimes. As you'll see down here, Carl, this was his birth name, I'm sorry. Even though it's got the two S's. He's Anders' son. This information is, my understanding, is now available to the folks that have signed on to my family plan. I sent information to Sam and Lincoln, Aaron and Sarah and Lisa, because Lisa said, Aaron wasn't much on Facebook, so I'm not sure how much he messes around with this sort of stuff. But there's spaces for Eric has signed on for one of them, so there's 3 spaces available. We'll sort out how this gets divided up, because there are 4 of you. There's 3 spaces left. Maybe Eric will say, maybe Eric will back out of it, because that would make it neat and tidy. Because I don't think Ellen's going to do this, because Ellen, she can look over my shoulder. You folks are generally not within arm's reach. So the 4 of you, hopefully, maybe, like I say, maybe I'll talk to Eric and he'll let one of the boys, somebody take over his spot, because he has an access to Ancestry, though I don't think he's a current member. Now, the thing with Ancestry is when you put up a tree and it stays there, it used to stay there forever just because you put it up there. Even if you weren't paying to be a member anymore, the tree was there. You could drop off for a couple of years, come back, and your stuff would be there. That's changed because, as I understand it now, once you put a tree up there, if you want to save it, it's like $5 a month to park it. If you want to actually work on your tree and access the information and expand by using their search features, then you become a member, and those things become available then. So there is a consideration there. Now, while I'm talking about that, the thing to bring up and we'll get into this in another video down the way. Ancestry is just one of the places that this information can be held, and where I have put information. I'm shaking the table, sorry. There are other places. One of them, the freest, well, they're all, the ones I'm going to mention now are free. Family Search is also run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which Ancestry is as well. But Family Search is a free site where your information, once you put it up there, or once it's there, stays there. And the difference is I have not found their search capabilities are not as good as it's clumsier to search on Family Search than it is on Ancestry. Ancestry is the slicker model. It's the more easy. Once you know what you're doing on Ancestry, you can get a lot of information pretty quickly. Family Search, it's clumsier. Another one is GeniaNet, and like I say, down the road I'll have information specific about these places, but just mentioning them now. GeniaNet is one of the sites. There's WikiTree. WikiTree is kind of fascinating because WikiTree is a group of volunteers who have as their goal to have one world tree where everybody can have their information up there, and we can all sort out how we're related to whoever, anywhere. And I haven't been on WikiTree much lately. What's nice about WikiTree in relation to our ancestry is that WikiTree has volunteers who will actually help you when you run into situations where you're looking into records that are not of your native language. In other words, I don't understand. I don't speak Swedish. But on WikiTree there are people that will help you decipher a record, etc. That's all volunteer, and but they've been very nice. And when I have used the site, they have challenges where it's kind of like a community of people that are mostly, like I say, the folks that will help you are very dedicated. The problem that you run into on WikiTree is because it's a one world tree, you put up someone up there, and it could be that somebody will come along and change your information. They can add to it. I think they can subtract it as well, but because WikiTree is staffed by a bunch of really dedicated volunteers, they go through the changes people make and verify whether or not that change should be made. I don't know how I don't know how comprehensive their quality control is, but I do know that if somebody makes a change, it is generally looked at. That kind of flags some folks to take a look at this change and see whether or not it was a good change, and if the people that are more expert at genealogy agree with how things were changed. But it does put your stuff up there for ancestors that, like I say, you'd be surprised who might also share that ancestry. So those are some other places to look other than Ancestry. I have delved mostly with Ancestry because what Ancestry has is very good search functions, and especially for all of you young folks of the next generation, have ancestral information from your other parent. In other words, not Lois, not Eric, not me. And those, I'm guessing now, but I'm guessing those ancestors were probably in this country longer than the ancestors in this tree. Most of the folks here, as a matter of fact, if I can go, let's just briefly, I don't know if this is pronounced Klaus or Klaes. This was my father's father. He was born in the United States, but his parents weren't. My father was born in the United States. She was born in the United States, but her mother was born in Germany. So Frederick was born in the United States. Actually, the letterers were here the longest of any of the family in this tree. The letterers were in the United States the longest. But Carl, my mother's father, he was born in Sweden, and her mother was born in the United States, but both of her parents were born in Sweden. So here's Swedish folks, a German girl, an American man, and then two more Swedish folks. So you don't have to go very far back to find people that aren't Native Americans, which fine and dandy, they're immigrants. But what complicates things is because they're from countries that don't speak, or the records weren't kept, let's say, in English. When you get into these folks and you want to verify information, you end up looking at records that are written in a language, obviously Swedish and in this case German, that not only are in another language, but sometimes the handwriting is so old style that you can't even make out the letters to punch it into a translate program, because it's difficult to figure out exactly what they were writing. And then also they used abbreviations and all sorts of things. So it complicates things finding information about folks whose ancestors haven't been in the country longer. However, my point is that the folks on your other side of your family, if they've been in the United States longer than this stuff, you're going to have access to records farther back into your other side of your tree that maybe will be very accessible, accurate, informational. If all of this stuff was written in English, I would probably have a lot better and even more comprehensive information than I've come up with so far. So this tree is hampered by the fact that none of us, to my knowledge, speak Swedish or German. And so we've had to rely on whatever I could find available that was understandable, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a few minutes. When you're looking at this tree, and I believe you're going to have access to this, again, the 4 people that are going to be able to access this family program will be able to, again, as I understand it, and I'm going to want folks to get back to me about what their experiences are. But for instance, if you wanted to see more information about Esther, you would go here, you would click, and you just simply click once. You'll see some information, but we'll click again on her name, and it'll take us to her page. On her page, there is a slew of information. This is the top of the page, and it goes down, and all of the information that I've gathered for her. This is all stuff, and I have a lot for her, because she and her family were, especially her father and her grandfather and uncles, were pretty prominent in Buffalo, and they made it into the paper a lot. And she actually was a businesswoman who ended up with some interesting newspaper articles relating to her second marriage, which was a bit of a scandal, but more on that later. So here, this is the information. Like I say, you're looking at this, and if you wanted to look at the census, you can view the census. Let's see, okay, this birth, let's see, it says here that there are 10 sources and 1 media. If I click just on the space, it'll show you all of the places you can find information that would relate back to her birth. So let's look at the 1990 census and just see what it says, because she would have been 7 years old. So now you can actually look at this information. You could drop down here and look at all of this, or I don't know what this. That is something new. I haven't. I'm completely out of information on that. That's something I haven't even seen since yesterday. Maybe it's been there. I don't think. That is very new, and I don't know. But anyway, we can go look at, we can look at the census page from 1990, and let's see if they'll do it. I gotta go down the page. Where is she on the page? Okay, down at the bottom of the page, this is the family. This is where it's highlighted, and there's Fred Lederer, Minnie Lederer. This is Esther's parents, and then her older brother, another older brother, and then this is Esther's information. And of course, if you follow along, the column highlights, what the answer relates to, and they do give you a little info there, birth month and whatnot.
Somebody found the device.
Yes, I know. I said that before, honey. So there's that information. Now you can go back, and there's all sorts of nuggets of information you can find out about what their occupation was. Let's see. It actually doesn't say his occupation, does it? Oh, yes, it does. He's an engraver. No, that's at school. Now, see, this is, oh, I'm highlighting Fredericks, and it's saying he's at school. Actually, it can't read what's there. That's probably the problem, because I believe that says he was an engraver. But these were, she was at, my grandmother was at school, and as you would assume she would be at the age that she was then. 6 years old is what they have her, because of, depending on what month the census was taken in relation to her birthday. I believe it was probably in June, her birthday's in August, so she was not yet 7 years old, so. Okay, so that's, you can get around that way. And then, like I say, you go down through here, and I have all sorts of information. When I've had information, for instance, here, I've added what the address was, because I think the census denotes that, but if I hadn't typed in the Guilford Street, that probably wouldn't be there. And for this, and she was a bookkeeper, I made that notation. This is one of the newspaper clippings, and there's lots of, as you can see, there's a ton of information. A lot of it is from newspapers. Now, also I don't know if you're familiar with this, and I think it was across the United States. I don't think it was just in the Northeast. Cities used to put directories together before there was phones. And actually, even after people were using phones, there were directories where you had the folks in your town, city, were, I guess it was just cities. I don't think towns did directories, but cities would put directories together, and they actually went door to door getting all the people's names of husbands and wives, not the children, and generally if there was a wage earner, what their occupation was. So the city directories can be interesting to look at to find out what someone's what their occupation was at different times, and generally that's listed. So let's go back, and I'm going to wrap this up because there's no sense making this ridiculously long, because I'm going to be learning and hopefully getting better organized so that there's more. Oops, that's not even what I wanted to do. Microsoft. I don't want Microsoft. Go away. Oh, this is embarrassing. I don't even know why that's doing that. I know. Go up here, Janice. No, I lost where we were. Oh, that's all right. We can get back there. While I'm talking, what I'm going to tell you, the next thing I'm going to do, just to make things kind of interesting and I'd say fun, but it's going to be rather dark. Ancestry. I got to write the spelling. A-N. Oh, that's a B. Ancestry. I'm going to go log in, I guess. Here we go, around the barn. What I'm going to tell you once I get back to the silly tree is, and here's the home page, as long as we're on this is the home page for me in Ancestry. I'm going to select to go to trees. There's a whole bunch of trees in here. Those are trees that I've worked on or created. They're almost all ones that I created. I share editing privileges with a few other folks on their trees. What I'm going to tell you now, and like I say, it's not for entertainment value, but I'm pretty sure you'll find this interesting. I've often thought that if I was a good writer, there's at least a short book that could be written about the tragedies in the women's lives. And I know more about I'm sure the men had tragedies too, but I can tell you specific about some of the women here and what happened in their lives. Now, I guess let's start with Esther. Esther married Klaus, and within 3 months he died. Is that true? Yes. September, October, November, December, January, February. No, 6 months. 6 months later he died, before my father was even born. So she was a young widow and lived with her parents, Frederick and Wilhelmina. And Wilhelmina went by the name Minnie. She was Minnie. And in 1923, Esther married a second time. It was not a good choice. He was a bit of a dandy, from what my father used to say. He was somewhat of a traveling salesman. He was kind of a shifty guy from my father's point of view, and I guess my father would have known him as a very young child, because 1923 he would have been like 8 years old, 7, 8, 9 years old, maybe up to the age of 10 when they finally, I believe Esther then finally divorced her second husband. And that's when in her file, there's some interesting information about the divorce and the carryings on. He was caught cheating in an apple orchard or something. And it went to court. And back in those days, and we're talking 1923, things could get quite sensational in the newspapers. And there was quite a fantastic little trial about why she needed to get the divorce from this guy. But within, let's see, 23 was when she divorced. No, she married in 23. They were only married for 3 years, and I'm not looking at her file, and I'm just being general here. After he had left town, and they separated, and I don't believe she ever saw him again. My understanding was, my father told me when I was a little girl, that what had happened was her second husband had given her syphilis, and within 6 to 8 years after the divorce, somewhere along in through there, she was given this is the story I was told, she was given the option of having her spinal cord cut, or she would have died from the syphilis. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what happened or what the story, that's what my father told me. I've tried to do a little bit of research. I've never seen anywhere where cutting a spinal cord was ever a treatment for someone who had a serious case of syphilis. But it may have been, or she may have been, the doctor in charge may have been simply a quack. The bottom line is she was rendered an invalid from the early 1930s for the rest of her life, for over 20 years, probably 25 years anyways, where she was confined to bed or a wheelchair. If someone could pick her up and put her in a chair. There was a chair that I remember when I was a little girl that had wheels on it, that was actually a stuffed chair like you would find in someone's living room, that somebody had put wheels on the bottom of, and my father could put her in that chair and wheel her out into the living room. But she had no feeling in her body from her waist down, which my mother told me years later meant that she needed to have enemas and was completely incontinent. So in an age where the plastic wasn't even thought of yet, and laundry was a challenge in the best of cases, she was in a very bad spot. And her mother took care of her for a number of years in the beginning. And my father, who was the only child Esther ever had, lived with his grandparents at that time because his mother wasn't able, she was living with her parents still. He married my mother in 1942. The grandmother, or Esther's mother, died 2 years later. So from 1942 on, my mother, Marion, was Esther's caregiver, as well as raising the three of us kids, who were all born by 1958. Eric was the last one born in 55. So I mean, she was caring for a bedridden mother-in-law, as well as the three kids, and so Esther's life was snuffed out in many ways, and she was, by all accounts, a very bright, energetic, business-type woman who, my father used to say that she was one of the founders of one of the bus companies in Western New York. I've not found anything that supports that specifically. I have found that she was one of the stops on the bus route from Albany to Buffalo. In East Pembroke was where her store was, and the store was actually something she got in her divorce from the second husband, because the store had been in his family in East Pembroke. Anyway, so she was quite a strong character, and probably would have led quite a life if she hadn't been invalid in her early 30s or mid 30s. So she had a kind of a nightmare of a life back when you think about the fact there was no social services. My mother, or her mother, was total caregiver, and the products available for caring people that were invalid were nowhere near as disposable and accessible as they are now. So that was sad, very sad. And I do remember her. I was born in '52, so I remember Esther. Okay, let's talk about some other grandmothers. My mother's mother, who was born in Falconer, New York, grew up, for some reason, I don't know why, but apparently paranoid about water. It was a terror for her. My mother told stories of going near water with her mother, and her mother didn't want to get in, didn't want to get wet, didn't want to, And bizarre as this is, apparently one time Ellen and one of her friends, for some unknown reason, decided that it made sense to get into a boat with my mother as a young child and row out into the water and throw my mother into the water so she could learn how to swim. Well, what that did was it created for my mother a lifetime fear of getting her face wet and being in water, and she almost was as afraid of water as her mother was. Though my mother understood that it wasn't quite as much of a terror, though I never knew my mother, though she would get in the water up to about her waist, I never knew her to dunk herself in and get her hair wet and all that kind of stuff. She was a wader. She was not a swimmer. But Ellen was very afraid of water, and her father, Carl, who by all accounts was a wonderful man. My mother used to say that he was a wonderful, everybody loved the guy, and all of his neighbors. He was one of those guys that everybody loved him. When he died in 1938, he left her some money. He left Ellen some money, and she had always wanted a big old fur coat, a long fur coat, not floor length, but obviously dress length, which would have been past her knee. And he left her enough money that she could get herself this beautiful fur coat that she'd always wanted. And so he died in 38, 39, comes along in April of 39. My grandfather, Carl, who actually went by Ephraim, everybody always knew him as Ephraim, but I have it this way because that was what his birth name was, Carl Ephraim Carlson. Though there's a story behind him not being called Carlson anymore. She and her husband Carl, again Ephraim, they were going to Buffalo because he was out of work in 1939, and they lived in Jamestown, and he figured, I guess the discussion was, go to Buffalo and find out if you can find a job up there. And about a mile or less away from their home, he went around a curve, lost control of the car, and it slid into the Chattacoin River in Jamestown. He was able to break a window on the car and get out, and she could not get out. He apparently tried to get her out, but with her heavy fur coat and being in, I guess, 10 feet of water, which would have obviously submerged them enough that, she could not get out. The newspaper article that I most recently saw, that I believe I saved, says that the fireman actually got her out of the car, but she had already expired. So she died by drowning. This is the woman who was paranoid all her life. So that, to me, that's just a nightmare personified. It's almost like a premonition that she was so afraid of water all her life, and then, so that was, she was only like 46 years old, I believe, or 47. Another grandmother with a story that will twist your heart. Hilda and her husband lived in Sweden, and he died at a very young age. He was, I don't think he was in his 30s, I guess. And she had, I think, 5 children at the time. And at that time, where they lived in Sweden, things were very rough. It was a very bad time, and people were just scraping to get by. She had her 2 older sons. The older boy, Gideon, stayed with her, but the next younger son was my grandfather. And she sent him, or the decision was to send him to the United States. He was 14 years old, and he was going to go live with, I believe it was her brother. It's all in the records, but I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I believe it was her brother who lived in Buffalo. No, he lived in Jamestown. And so my grandfather was packed up and sent onto a boat to come across the United States by himself at the age of 14 to live with his uncle. Now, I've never heard that story from him, and I really didn't hear much about it from my mother. I don't, other than the fact that it was kind of remarkable that he was 14, but I guess it wasn't all that uncommon, though usually people, the folks that made the crossing were generally a little bit older than that if they were doing it on their own, or if they were in that neighborhood age-wise, there was usually someone put on board with them that was, you know, someone, a neighbor, a cousin, something that would help him, especially because he was going to a country where he was not going to be able to speak the language until he was there for a while. But anyway, so she's in Sweden, she's a widow, and she's got some of her younger children left. And I'll make the long story short here. She does eventually come to the United States with some of her remaining children. A couple of them were left in Sweden. She came over to the United States and lived in Jamestown for a while. At some point, she decided to move to Florida because the older boy, the one that I mentioned, Gideon, had moved to Florida and owned a store down there. I believe it was a grocery store. And she went down there to stay with him. Now, there's a lot of blanks here in this, but I can tell you what I do know is my mother told me that she ended up being a housekeeper for a man who was apparently quite wealthy. And I don't know this, but reading between the lines, there may have been more to it than housekeeping. But the sad part of this is that when the man died, I believe she believed that he was going to leave her some things, and he left her nothing. That's my dryer. I'm sorry. We'll just I'd like to know how to turn that off, but anyway. So she's living with this person, and he dies, and she's now destitute. And rather than moving back in with her son, or perhaps, I don't know exactly how this transpired as far as from a day-to-day period, but after this man died and she felt that she had nothing left, she went out and walked on a railroad track and walked into the path of a train and was killed. And that her profile does show the newspaper clippings, which allude to it being suicide, but they don't flat out say that. From what I understand, she stepped into the path of the train. Now, I don't know if there was more than one track and she was walking on one track and didn't turn around to see whether or not there was actually the train on the rails she was walking on. I don't know. But in any case, she must have known what she was doing. She stepped into the path of the train and was killed instantly. Well, I'll just tell you one more grandmother's sad story, and that's this great grandmother. This one, obviously, I did not know her. She died way before I was born. Her story is she was married to this Johan, and again, they're in Sweden, and times are tough, and Johan decides to come to the United States with the man that turns out to be his son-in-law. Johan came with Carl, and they went out west. They were in the West Coast in California. There's a lot of blanks in this story, though I do remember my mother talking about her grandparents talking about having been in California, because that's where they were married, though she came over from Sweden, but they were married in California. But Johan went to California without his wife several years before she came to the United States. He's in California, and while he's in California, he takes on a wife and has a child while he's out there. And somewhere, again, the timeline, I could give you dates, but I can't give you what everybody knew and who said what to whom. But somewhere along the line, as that was going on, Britta decided to come to the United States with the rest of her children. I don't know if family members sent her money or how that, or maybe she suspected he'd been on his own long enough. I better go check. So she comes to the United States, and he comes back to Jamestown then, and they lived together for I don't know how many years. I could look at their files and maybe put that together, but they were together for a number of years. And at some point, Britta found a letter that Johan had received from this woman in California begging him to come back to her and their son. And my understanding from what I've read, this Britta never recovered from reading that. It broke her heart, and they say within, I don't know, a very short period of time after reading that letter, she was dead. So those are some stories about grandmothers and their tragedies. This grandmother fell and broke her hip at her daughter's house. A daughter, not Ellen, Ellen's sister, Ethel, and she broke her hip, and then there was no, back in the 1930s, if you broke your hip, it was basically a death sentence, and so she lingered on for a while before succumbing to pneumonia, and she died after breaking her hip and probably never getting up and walking again. And again, there's probably very sad stories about many of these men too, but for whatever reason, I have those stories about grandmothers, and as I think of things that might actually have an interesting story attached, I'll pass those along. I guess that for now, that kind of wraps it up. This is a little over 35 minutes. What I'd like you to do, because I am going to put this is obviously on YouTube, and I believe you'll be able to leave comments. And if you have a comment, probably rather than emailing me, if you're able to write a comment below, write a comment if you have a thought about a question or something that I've said that's confusing, blah, blah, blah. And then I can answer your comment, and everybody can see what is being said. So maybe we can do it that way. This is an experiment. I'm trying this. We'll see how it works. I can give you, there's going to be more information about how to maneuver in Ancestry. I will have more information about the other sites that have ancestral information that do not require a commitment money-wise. And I'll have more information about that in another one. We'll talk that stuff over the next time we get together. So let me know if you're able to leave comments. Let me know what your comments are, and again, any questions that you might have, I'll try to answer here. I believe I can do that. Yeah, I can answer your comments, I think. We'll find out. I'm a real newbie here. I've done some videos over the years, but I never did one where I had expected, a back and forth. I used to do them for puppies when we raised dogs, and I used to do the YouTube videos and then put that up on our website, which I don't have a website anymore. So check back. I will have more information, and what I'm going to do next time I send out information, I won't send out a group text. I will let you know individually, so that when you see that, you aren't pestered by other people commenting and noticing that there's information. After I did it, I thought, oh, that's probably not the way to do it. So I'll let you know when there's another one up, and we'll keep this going and see where we end up with. So thanks. Let me know what you think. Take care. Bye-bye.